Tonight of kind of who that person is as I'm talking about it. So tonight we are going to be talking a lot about Ephesians. Ephesians is a chapter in the Bible, in case you didn't know. And Ephesians is a chapter written by Paul. Paul was in prison in Rome, and he was writing to a church to kind of explain to them, this was a church that he actually pastored for 3 years. Now he's in prison, and he's writing to them and explaining to them kind of what's going on, what might be wrong with them, and how they can fix it. And so what we're going to be talking about tonight is forgiveness, and really why that is so important in our life. And so that's why we even had a little song earlier before service started about forgiveness, because that's really what tonight's message is about, is the continuum of forgiveness to bitterness. So I'm going to start with Ephesians 4:22. You're going to hear plenty of Ephesians tonight, so it's all going to be up on the screen, so you'll be able to follow along pretty well. So Ephesians 22 says, "You were taught, with regard to your former way of life, to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires." So he's talking about your former way of life. That is before you were a Christian. That is your former way of life, because you are a new being now that you're a Christian. So your former way of life, which was corrupted by deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. So, really about just being a whole new person in Christ. Once you have accepted Christ in your life, that old you is gone, this new you is here. And what he's talking about is the way you used to handle things are gone now. This is a new way you need to handle things now that you're a Christian. This is really the way you need to handle things. And so really what it's about is remembering our identity in Christ every day. And that's probably the hardest part, is as things happen to you and you're kind of responding to things happening to you and you don't feel like you're being treated fairly, it's hard to remember your identity in Christ sometimes, because when things are happening to you, you want to protect you, right? You're probably the most important thing to you is you, right? If you're not, you're probably lying if you don't think you is not the important thing to you. So when things are happening to you, you're thinking about you. And sometimes it's hard to think of Christ when you're trying to think about how I'm going to protect myself. So that's really what this is about, is remembering our identity in Christ. And remember that we're a whole new creation, and that will help us not forget our relationship with Christ. So let's go on now to Ephesians 4:25. And it says, "Therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to his neighbor, for we are all members of one body." And really what this one's talking about is, therefore each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one body. And really what that means is, stop acting like stuff's not happening. If something's happening against you and you're being sinned against, stop ignoring it, or stop not reacting to it. If something's happening to you and you feel like you're being sinned against, you can't just cut off that falsehood, and you need to confront it and deal with it. And it says, for we are all members of one body. He's talking about the church. Because guess what? People in the church are probably going to sin against you. Unfortunately, that's what happens when you do life with people. They mess up and they sin against you. So people say that all the time. This shouldn't have happened to somebody in church or whatever. There's humans here. We all make mistakes. That's really what this is about. So when he says all of one body, he's really talking about the church, and realizing that things can happen to you from other members of your church. We're all one family, we're all one body, but bad things will still happen because we aren't perfect. So, and a lot of times the hardest relationships we have are with our family, right? Does anybody have a difficult relationship with a family member? Yeah, right? So, at church, we always talk about we're a family. You guys will probably hear us all the time say we're a family here at 155. Guess what? That means you're going to have problems with people at church, because we're all family, so we start to get really comfortable with each other, and then we treat each other badly, because that's what you do with your family, unfortunately, is you sometimes treat them badly. So the more comfortable you get around here, and the more friends you make, unfortunately, that means you may get into some conflict with some people. But we need to deal with it as Christians, and not just ignore it or get mad and walk off. We need to deal with it in the church. So That's really what he's talking about, is just dealing with issues, but dealing with them also in the church. And then also, when he says the falsehood and speak truthfully, stop lying that there's not a sin. Quit pretending the sin didn't happen. Talk it out. If you feel like somebody has wronged you, you need to confront them and talk it out. Usually it's a misunderstanding, or they didn't realize what they said was hurtful, or whatever it is. So if you feel like you've been wrong, confront that person in a nice manner. We're not talking, confront them with the right hook. We're talking confront them in a nice manner. And just tell them what happened. Hey, when you said X, that really hurt my feelings, right? So if I ever say something to you and that hurts your feelings, you should definitely come to me and go, Brandon, I didn't like it when you said that. So if Audrey doesn't like it that I keep calling her the best slide tackler I've ever met, Audrey needs to come to me later and go, I wish you'd stop telling me I was the best slide tackler you ever met. So just one of those things we have to be careful of is, don't assume that people like the way you're saying stuff or whatever. So if you have a problem with somebody, you need to talk about it. And sometimes lying is not telling the truth, but sometimes lying is not telling the whole truth. So you're just not dealing with it. So you're really kind of lying to yourself if you're not dealing with something completely. You're just kind of, it'll get better, kind of lying to yourself about it. So be careful of that as well. Next, Ephesians 4:26. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry. Anger is the correct response to sin. Right? Anger is the correct response. People go, well, you shouldn't get angry. Guess what? Jesus got angry. God gets angry at sin. So anger is not something you have to avoid. You don't need to be afraid of it. Anger is the right response to sin. It's okay to be angry, but don't let your anger lead to sin. That's where the problem happens. It's okay to be angry, and if bad things happen to people, you should be angry about that. If I find out something happens to one of the girls here and they get raped, I'm going to be angry. I'm going to be real angry about it, right? And that's okay to be angry about it, but I can't let my anger lead to sin. So I have to be very careful about what happens with my anger, but it's okay to be angry. Don't act like you have to just bottle that up and act like it never happened, because you have to acknowledge that anger happens, and anger is the right response to sin. So don't react with sin when you're sinned against in your anger. Don't seek vengeance, right? As soon as you're sinned against, you shouldn't start plotting your revenge of, ha ha ha, now I know how I'm going to get them back. I'm going to wait till just the right moment, and I know exactly what I'm going to do. That is not the best way to handle your anger. Vengeance is not a good response to sin. It only leads to more, unfortunately. So, and the other thing he says is, don't let the sun go down while you're still angry. And so that's really about, the longer we wait to deal with something, the harder it is to deal with. Have you ever confronted somebody about something they did a year ago? You're like, remember a year ago when you said that to me? Man, that made me mad. They're like, what are you talking about? Right? By then, it's either that person's forgot about it, because it maybe didn't mean anything to them at the time, or you bottled it up for a year before you dealt with it. Don't wait to deal with stuff like that. Waiting a year or 6 months or even a couple weeks and being angry I'm going to wait and get real mad and then I'm going to confront them. Just deal with it right away. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. So deal with it right away. The longer you bottle that stuff up and just continue to let it get all raged up in you, the worse it's going to get. So be careful of that for sure. Next, verse number 27. And do not give the devil a foothold. What the heck does that mean? A foothold? Where does the devil get a foothold? So, what that's really talking about is when you get angry and you start thinking about sinning, that's really when the devil can kind of get a hold of you and use that to his advantage. The devil loves a bitter believer. So if you're a believer but you're bitter about something, man, Satan's going to use that for all he's worth. And I'm not a big, Satan guy and worried about the devil and stuff. But that's just one of those things where that's kind of one of those things where evil can kind of just seek into your life or get into your life if you're bitter about stuff and holding on to it. That will allow the devil a foothold in your life. And the only way he has access to hurt you is through sin. He will encourage you. He will make you think, yes, that sounds like a great idea to seek vengeance by cutting the brakes on their car. So don't listen to him when he says stuff like that. So you have to be very careful about not letting Satan get the best of you. All right, verse 28. Verse 28. He who has been stealing must steal no longer, but must work, doing something useful with his own hands, that he may have something to share with those in need. Those who have been stealing must steal no longer, but must do work. And really what this is about is finding a new outlet or a new response. So if you get in a fight with your mom, if the first thing you do is you go in your room and crank up the music and just try and show them you're mad because you cranked up the music, pick something else to do. Just try something else. That's why, you've been using that response since, 4th grade, or since you finally got that boombox in your room or whatever. So actually, find a different response for your anger when you've been sinned against. Find a different way to do it. It just develops a pattern which doesn't really help you deal with anything, because what will happen is your body just becomes immune to that pattern of, when I'm angry, I'm going to listen to music. But that doesn't really help anything. I just think it does because I always listen to music loud when I get angry. So find a new response for your anger when you've been sinned against, and that will help you kind of deal with things. Anybody ever gone and worked out or gone running when they're angry? Good, a few of you. Good physical activities, probably a great thing to do if you're angry, right? Get out that aggression on push-ups or running or whatever you do. You'll often find that, unfortunately, your adrenaline only gets you so far, then you realize you're still out of shape and can't run very far anyway. And by the time you get to the end of the block, you're tired and you're not angry anymore. But whew, it was worth it. Better than just turning up the music for 2 hours. I ran to the end of the block. Whew. All right, I feel better now. So make sure that you find a different way to deal with things. Who here likes to post random things on Facebook and Twitter when they're angry? Like, I am so mad at them. And that's all you put. I am so mad at them. Right? You're all guilty. I read all your Facebooks and Twitters. You're all guilty. You all do that. I'm so mad at them. I am so mad at them. That is the most vague, random statement ever. Only a couple things are happening there. One is you want attention more than anybody else I've ever seen, Jackson. Or you raise your hand. Okay. Find a different response. Posting random things on Facebook and Twitter that nobody understands, and you're just trying to show everybody that you're angry about something that you don't want to talk about, it makes no sense whatsoever. There's got to be a different outlet than random social media posts about nothing. I'm so mad at them. Who's them? That's what you want, right? You want somebody to ask you? You might as well just say it if you're going to go through all the work of posting it up there. Just get it out in the open. Man, oh man. Okay, I'm off my soapbox on that. So, let's move on to verse 29. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths. But only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, for whom you were sealed for the day. So, how do you deal with that? Anybody here said something that they shouldn't have when they were angry? Maybe accidentally let a curse word slip or something, or maybe not even accidentally, just kind of let her fly. Figured that would make things feel better, An F word or an S word would all of a sudden make things feel better. For some reason it doesn't. So, when we're sinned against, it is so easy to get into the idea of your next response, right? You're done. If you get in an argument with somebody, you're already done listening to them. You're only thinking of your next response and how whatever your next response is going to be the sickest burn ever. You're already, as soon as they stop talking, you're going to jump in there. You got the sickest burn. You're so ready to get them, right? that doesn't really help the situation, right? You're done talking to somebody if all you're thinking in your head is what my response is going to be and how I'm going to show them with my awesome response. This is something I definitely struggle with. I am one of the most sarcastic guys I know. Sarcasm is actually one of my gifts, spiritual gifts. So I am famous for thinking of my next one-liner to completely cut you to the ground the next chance I get. And it's something I struggle with. Because it's one of those things that makes me feel better about myself if I can just cut you to the ground. And so it's something I struggle with, and I have to be very careful about when and how I use that sarcasm, that I'm in the right company, that people that understand me, because I've said some things to people that they took as very hurtful, yet I was just taking this kind of nice, weird, sarcastic sense of humor, but they didn't see it that way. So be very careful about, holding your tongue and saying appropriate things to appropriate people. What you might say to a friend, you can't say to somebody that's not quite your friend or has a different personality. So be very careful about that. And also, we really need to be careful about this with our family, right? We talked about that with the church earlier. But you will say some terribly hateful things to your siblings, won't you? Do you have a brother or sister you've said something hateful to in the past? Yes. Courtney, Thor, raise your hand. All right, so yes, we will say some terrible things to our siblings and to our parents, right? Anybody here ever said I hate you to your parents? That is an absolutely terrible thing, right? Listen. That is an absolute terrible thing to say to a parent who's done nothing but raise you since you were an infant and all that. It feels so good to say it at the heat of the moment, though, right? I remember saying that to my mom about 1 million times growing up, and it feels so good, but then later you're like, yeah, but she did take me to McDonald's, so I guess she does kind of love me, and so, right, there's Zaxby's involved, it must be okay. And so, be careful about how you speak to your family. Holding your tongue with your family is very difficult because you're so comfortable with them, right? You're so comfortable with your siblings and your parents, even cousins and all that you will say some absolutely terrible things to them because you're comfortable. And those are the people you should be the most protective about and be the nicest to because you live life with them every single day. Why would you intentionally say something hurtful to them? You're going to live life with them tomorrow. Tomorrow you're going to run into them in the hallway. Tonight you can be really mad. Tomorrow morning you're going to be eating breakfast with them. You might as well be nice to them, right? So be very careful about holding your tongue with your family. You could say some terrible, terrible things. And it's really because you're hurt, right? You're upset, so I'm going to say the meanest thing I can think of. And to a parent, I hate you is probably the worst thing you can say to them. So that's the first thing you think of is, well, what can I say to really set mom off? Oh, I know. I hate you. Oh, that'll do it, right? That'll get you extra grounding for sure. So be very careful about holding your tongue when you are sinned against or feel like you're being cornered or in an argument or anything. Just be careful about that. All right. Verse 31. We're going to break this one into a couple pieces here. It says, get rid of all bitterness, rage and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Get rid of all bitterness. Is your next fill in there? Get rid of all bitterness. So this is what happens. And this is where the title of this message comes in. When you're sinned against, you have two options. Forgiveness or bitterness. That's it. If you're sinned against, you have two options. Forgiveness or bitterness. If you don't choose forgiveness, you've chosen bitterness by default. Right? So as soon as you choose to not forgive somebody for something that they did to you, you've chosen bitterness. You've chosen to hold that in tight. I'm going to hold on to that because I'm choosing not to forgive them. I'm going to choose bitterness. Now, you never say that to yourself, but that's really what it does. Bitterness is just holding that in for no reason but to hurt yourself. I saw a quote from, I think Joyce Meyer or somebody said, Bitterness is like drinking rat poison and expecting the rat to die, right? You don't drink poison and expect the other person to die. Bitterness, that's what it is. Because by not forgiving them, you're not hurting them. You're only hurting you by holding on to that bitterness and being so just angry about stuff. So remember that bitterness is just unforgiveness. That's all bitterness is. So if you've chosen, I'm terrible in English. If you've chosen to not forgive somebody, you've chosen bitterness. So right now, you should be thinking about somebody that maybe you probably should have forgiven, right? That you need to forgive in your head. If you have not forgiven them, you're choosing to hold on to that as bitterness instead. You're going to hold on so tight, it's going to eat you up. They don't even care. They don't even care that you're holding on to this so tight, and it's destroying you, and you're so angry about it, and then just every morning and every night you're thinking about, ooh, I'm so mad about that. They don't even care. So the only person you're hurting is yourself by not just forgiving them and moving on. So be careful about that. And scientifically they say bitterness in girls usually comes out in depression. So if you're a girl and you're bitter about something, usually that's going to come out to other people as depression. So if people ever said, oh, you look depressed all the time, are you depressed today? You're probably bitter about something that you've been holding on to for quite a while, and now it's led to that stage of depression now in you. In boys, it usually comes out in anger.
Yes!
Men are famous for just getting angry when they're bitter about something. But usually, it's not just angry about one specific thing. They're just kind of angry about life now, right? They're just angry. You ever met one of those people that you're like, whoa, what are they all mad about all the time? It's like every time you run into that person, they just seem like they're just kind of on edge. You're like kind of guarded against them because they seem so high-strung and just kind of angry, like you're not sure what's going on. That's usually bitterness. It's just kind of they've held on to for so long that they won't let go. And all that happens when you hold on to that for so long, whether you're a guy or a girl, you become a Taylor Swift song. Why you gotta be so mean, right? I mean, that's what happens to you, and eventually you just end up as a song, you know? It's all you are is mean. So, one of the other things I find funny about bitterness is that usually if you ask somebody, oh, what are you angry about, or what are you depressed about, or whatever, and they give you their reason, it's a good reason. It's like, man, you're right, I'd be mad about that too. That's a pretty good reason to be mad, right? Everybody has a good reason for their anger, their bitterness, or their depression of what they're dealing with. They've been sinned against, and it's a bad thing that happened to them, or whatever the case may be. It's a great reason. That's how we try to rationalize it is, this was so terrible, I'm going to hold on to it forever. I have a good reason to do this. A good reason doesn't excuse the idea that you're going to hold on to something for that long. So don't try to rationalize it as that's a good reason, or if you're talking to a friend and trying to help them, don't go, oh, you're right, that is bad. I would hold on to that for a while, right? We need to let go of stuff even though it seems like a good reason. Next thing about bitterness is bitterness can include God. And this is really where bad things happen and we're not sure who to be mad at, so we just decide to be mad at God instead. And we're bitter against God for something that, just happened. Sin happens in the world. God gave us free will, so therefore people can do bad things against us. So sin can happen, so people sometimes, if they don't understand things, they will turn bitter against God. When bad things usually happen that people can't explain, they get bitter against God because of it. It's okay to be angry about something with God and tell Him that you're angry. God, I can't believe you let that happen. He's a big God. He can handle it if you yell at Him a little bit. But don't hold it against Him as bitterness. That's not going to help you in the long run. Sometimes also that people can get bitter out of jealousy. Right? Have you ever met somebody that seemed a little bitter? Maybe they were jealous about something. Maybe you had a new boyfriend, and they've been wanting a new boyfriend, they couldn't get a boyfriend, now you have one, they're kind of mad at you or bitter because you have a boyfriend, they don't. Maybe you finally got that fancy new pair of shiny Toms, and your friend's like, man, I want some shiny Toms. I didn't get those shiny Toms. You're so spoiled, right? So bitterness can kind of come out from jealousy sometimes. So be careful about that. Bitterness is also a lot based on the proximity of the offender more than the magnitude of the offense. So that sounds kind of hard to understand, but let me explain this to you. Somebody that you're really close to that sins against you is a lot worse than a total stranger that sins against you. So if for some reason, your uncle kills your brother, right? Your uncle just kills your brother. That seems a lot more terrible than just some random accident where some drunk driver hit your brother and killed him, right? The proximity of the offender makes all the difference in that, right? Because if somebody's so close to you, when they sin against you, it hurts a lot more than when it's somebody that's more distant and random. So be careful of that, because it'll make you hold on to stuff a little closer than you need to. So, and you can try to distance yourself from bitter people. So make a case to make sure you can love them in Jesus at an arm's length. But be careful that bitterness sometimes can be infectious. If you hang out with a bitter person too long, you start to feel a little bit too, like you spend a half hour with them, all of a sudden you were happy, and now you're kind of angry too because they brought up all the things that are wrong with the world, and you're like, yeah, there's bad stuff with the world. I'm bitter about that too. I don't like the president either. Whatever it is, right? I mean, you hang out with people that are angry about stuff, and pretty soon you're kind of angry about that same stuff too. You didn't even care 30 minutes ago. You didn't know that thing existed. Now all of a sudden you're angry about it because they were angry about it. So be careful other people's bitterness doesn't wear off on you. So that was all really just about bitterness in that first part of that section. Get rid of all bitterness. Next, rage and anger. Rage and anger. We already talked about anger. Anger is okay. It's just that you don't sin in your anger. And rage is really where anger has taken control of you, and you have done something completely idiotic because of that anger is built up and turned into rage in you. So something you weren't even thinking about now, you kind of have made a bad decision out of rage. Anybody made a bad decision out of rage before? Anybody ever punched a wall or an inanimate object when they're upset? Boy, that is dumb, right? Nobody gets hurt in that but you, right? I have punched my fair share of walls. It's the dumbest thing every time, but it still feels good. Right up until I hit the wall and realize, ow, man, that was dumb, right? So rage is where that anger just kind of takes over and you make bad decisions. Next, it says, get rid of all bitterness, get rid of rage and anger, brawling and slander. Brawling and slander. Obviously, physically fighting is not a good solution, right? So brawling, no good, no matter what's happening. Getting into a fist fight or a hair pulling or a slapping contest or poking somebody in the eyes like Three Stooges, none of that is really helpful in the situation, so be very careful about any kind of physical confrontation. If you're about to get into a physical confrontation with somebody, the train has left the tracks. You have lost all reason of what's going on. So if all of a sudden things seem to be going fine, all of a sudden you yell, squad up. Things have probably happened that are out of your control at this point, right? If you're about to get in a physical altercation, bad things are about to happen. I've been waiting like 3 months to call Audrey out on that, so finally get to do it. Sweet. Okay, so slander. Slander. Does anybody know what slander is? Has anybody ever said anything untrue about you? Raise your hand if somebody has said something untrue about you in the last 5 minutes. Maybe, you don't know. Unless you're watching Facebook right now, somebody could have already said something bad about you in the last 5 minutes, and you do not know, right? Slander is not a good option. It is something you need to avoid. Slander is something you need to avoid. I know it feels good to say something bad about somebody, maybe whether it's true or untrue. Slander is not good because you know why? It hurts when it happens to us. So why would you do that to somebody else? Nobody wants to be called a slut behind their back, right? So why would you call somebody a slut behind their back? That's not a good response, right? If you don't want it to happen to you, don't do it to others, right? Doing to others as you wish them to do unto you type of thing. So avoid slander. Do not talk behind people's back. Do not spread gossip about them. Slander is not going to fix the situation if you've been sinned against. And the last one is malice. So it says, get rid of all bitterness,